Hi, everybody. Welcome to another class of WebYeshiva. This is the series on the Shemoneh Esrei in depth, and this is Shir 2. And it was supposed to be about the first bracha, which is called Avot, but I'm going to spend most of the time answering a question from last week's class, which is why do we stand for the Amida? Now, it's called Amida, right? The Shemoneh Esrei has many names. It's called, basically, when we say tefillah, prayer, we mean the Shemoneh Esrei prayer. It's called Shemoneh Esrei because there are 18/19 blessings. It's called Tefillah Belachash, silent prayer, because we recite it silently at first, then repeat it out loud. It's called Amida because we recite it standing up. But the question is, why should we stand up to say the Amida? So I had some thoughts. My first, well, actually, no, I'll rephrase that. I had some thoughts. Some of you contacted me after this year with your thoughts, and basically everybody's first thought was that it's the most important prayer, and we're saying it as if we're standing before a king or queen, and therefore it's appropriate to stand up as a sign of respect for standing, in the throne room before the most powerful being in the universe. And that certainly makes sense, and I don't want to say that we should be thinking that we're standing before a king, but I'm not sure that's the reason that we stand. For example, there are some cultures where you don't stand before a king. There are, if you go to get knighted at Buckingham Palace, you kneel down before the king. There are petitioners who throw themselves on the floor before a ruler. There are, and now I don't remember, but I believe there's a tribe in Africa where nobody's allowed to be higher than the king, so everyone has to be on their knees while he stands up. So the fact that we're before a king doesn't mean necessarily that we have to stand up. Similarly, it's the most important prayer, so it makes sense to stand up, but actually we have other prayers where Tachanun, for example, right, the prayer we say immediately after the Amida, is also a really important prayer. That's the prayer that that Rabban Gamliel's, I'm going to get sidetracked, but you remember the story in Bav Mitzvah Nun Tet Amud Bet about Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Eliezer was kind of put in cherem, was outcast because of his view, and Rabbi Eliezer's wife was the sister of Rabban Gamliel, and she was scared that Rabbi Eliezer would pray and Rabban Gamliel would die, so she made sure he didn't say the Tachanun prayer every day. She stopped him from putting his head down to say Tachanun prayer. So that seems that praying with your head down is also like a very important, powerful way of praying. On Rosh Hashanah, and especially Yom Kippur, at the kind of one of the most important parts of the year, we lie down on the floor, put our faces on the floor. So why do we assume that standing is the most highest way of praying? The Shema prayer is, there's a discussion about whether Shemoneh Esrei is by Torah law or rabbinic law, or rather whether the prayer is rabbinic or Torah, but basically the consensus is that the Shemoneh Esrei, the wording of the Amida, is rabbinic. Shema is a Torah prayer, and yet we can say that sitting down or standing up. We have a precedent of standing from, if you look in Tanakh, right, and I just put the English here because I'm just trying to prove a point, we have Yoshaphat, right, standing, stood in the assembly of Judah, and he prayed. Shlomo HaMelech in Melachim Aleph, when he dedicates the temple, he stands and prays. We find Daniel, I think I mentioned him last week, he's praying, says he kneels, he went upstairs to the room, and 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed. We find bowing, David HaMelech and Tehillim, I'll bow down towards your holy temple. We find that Moshe and Aaron, when they wanted to pray, they fell face down and cried out, "Oh God," etc., etc. And in reference to the Shema, it says, talk about that when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, when you lie down, when you get up. In other words, we have prayer in almost every possible permutation. So it's not accurate to simply say the most important prayer we say standing up. I guess you could say, if you are mapping out the story of prayer, we start kind of start sitting down, and then we stand up, and then we sit down and stand up, and then we sit down and we stand up. There's a rhythm to the sitting and standing, but that doesn't answer the question. Fundamentally, I don't know why we stand up to say the Amida prayer, or at least I don't think there's a simple answer that explains it. So the Gemara Brachot talks about 3 different ways of bowing down. Right? I said there's only one. There's Tana Rabbanan, Kida means alapayim. We bow down with your face on the ground. Shnei makar v'tikot bat sheva payim aretz. Kri'ah al brikaim. There's a kind of bowing when you get down on your knees. Shnei ma mikra al brikav. Ishtachava. Again, bowing, prostrating. Zeh pashut yadayim v'raglayim. That's stretching your whole body, arms and legs out, lying on the floor. Shnei ma havon avon ani v'mecha v'achecha ishtachavot lacha aretz. These are all ways of praying to God, and the proof of each of them is how they approached a king to speak. Right? Bathsheba comes to David to pray, to ask that her son Shlomo should become the next king. I don't know who's speaking in the second verse. I'm sorry. In the last one, Yaakov is talking about the future, right? When he's going to come down to, or he's going to bow down to Joseph, who's going to be the sun and the moon, and his prophecy is that they're going to bow down completely on the ground to Joseph. So when you approach a king, you have all these different ways of approaching a king, and it's not, well, let's stand up because we're in front of the king. That's just not what happens. So I want to go in a different direction. I want to say maybe standing is we don't stand because we need to stand, but rather we stand in order to have the proper kavanah. Somehow standing puts us in the right frame of mind to have intent to pray properly. In other words, standing is a bit of a byproduct rather than the purpose. And also we'll see that even when we stand, we're not standing like soldiers at attention. It's not that kind of standing. So the Mishnah in Brachot says, Ein omdin litpalel ela mitoch koved rosh. You may not stand up to pray, meaning, well, in general, but specifically Amidah prayer, except through koved rosh. Koved rosh, seriousness. I guess they translate it as gravity and submission. I think that's a mistranslation. Chasidim harishonim hayu shohim sha'achat u'mitpalalim. The pious people, the early pious people, would spend an hour preparing, and then they would stand up to pray. So they could have intent in their hearts to the omnipresent. And then, how important is it to have this concentration? Even if the king asks, how are you? While you're in the middle of saying Shemoneh Esrei, lo yeshivenu, you may not answer. The Gemara qualifies that if he's going to kill you, if you don't answer, you may answer. Which in case is not pekuach nefesh. Even if you have a snake curled around, wrapped around your leg, and again we're talking about a venomous snake, lo yafsik, you may not stop the Amidah. So again, you have to stand up for the Amidah, ideally, although we'll see not necessarily. But I would like to suggest, at least as a first answer, that standing is a symptom of the level of kavanah that we have to have. It's a way to get into the mindset, I guess. If we're meditating, and we'd be meditating sitting down, and we'd be meditating standing up. And that the purpose of standing is not to stand, not because that's the posture for prayer, but that's the posture for concentration. Kavod Rosh is it literally means a heavy head, which leads to the correct posture with your head for prayer, I agree. But it also means it's the opposite of Kalut Rosh, which is lightheadedness, foolishness, frivolity. So Kavod Rosh is seriousness. But yes, it plays nicely in both of those meanings. So the Mishnah seems to say, if we had right? If we were on that level, we would spend a lot of time preparing for those few minutes we'd be standing and doing the prayer. Nowadays, at Mincha, if we're Ashkenazi, we just say Ashrei Yoshrei Ve'etecha. We say one chapter of Tehillim, and then we're ready to go, as if that is enough to prepare us. And also, as well as standing so that we have intent, we're standing so we can face the right direction. And in fact, standing becomes secondary to the direction. If a person was riding a donkey, right, riding on a bus, I don't know, right, and it's time to pray, Yered, he should get off the donkey. If he can't get off the donkey, I don't know, it's a bus, and the bus stop, there's no bus stop right now. So Yachzir et panav, he should turn his face to the direction of Jerusalem, like we said last week, to face the temple. And if he can't turn his head because the donkey or the bus are going on a windy road and it's impossible to continually face the right direction, he should direct his heart to the Holy of Holies. If he's sitting on a boat or a wagon or a raft, there obviously he cannot stand up and not dismount, so he should have intent with his heart when he's davening the Amida to direct his heart towards the Holy of Holies. So what I think this is saying is that standing is secondary to kavanah, right? Ideally, we stand so that we can face the right direction, so that we can have the right intent, which is directed towards the Holy of Holies. But in fact, if for some reason we cannot stand, then the main thing is to have our heart facing the right direction, and even if we're sitting down, that our heart is doing the right thing. And even though the Mishnah said that ideally you should get off the donkey, we'll see that Rabbi Yodanasi disagrees with that. So the Mishnah had said and said you should get down. Tana Rabbanan. So we have a Braita which teaches us if somebody was riding a donkey and the time of prayer arrived, if there is somebody there to hold the donkey while he's praying, he should get off his donkey, let somebody hold the donkey so it doesn't run away, and he should pray. If there's nobody to hold the donkey, he should sit in his place on the donkey and pray sitting down. Now, why should he do that? Because if he's worried about his donkey running away, he won't be able to have proper intent for his prayer. In other words, intent is what we need, not standing. So if standing will distract you from praying properly, stay sitting. Rebbe Omer ben kach ben kach yishev b'mkom v'yitpalel. Even if you've got somebody else to hold the donkey, still stay sitting on the donkey, because while you're praying, you'll be worried. Maybe the guy isn't doing his job properly. Maybe the donkey still ran away. Maybe. So therefore, because your mind won't be calm if you're praying while you're not sitting on the donkey. So therefore, the purpose of standing is to have intent. If standing interferes with intent, then stay sitting. Right now, so I just want to answer, Sarah. Yes, we are speaking to the king. We are petitioning the king. Absolutely, we should imagine we're standing before the king. That's one level of intent that we need when we pray. But standing is a means to get to that intent, not an end in itself. And therefore, if standing interferes with us having the intent that we're going to stand before a king, we should pray in a way that's not standing. And Rava says, Amaravi Tamer Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi, Halachika Rebbe, the halach is like Rebbe, that even if you have somebody to hold your donkey, you should still pray sitting on the donkey. Halacha lamaisa, if you're sitting on a bus, if the bus isn't stopping, you're sitting on a plane, pray sitting on the plane. Don't try and pray standing up, because you won't be able to have proper intent if you're standing up being jostled by the trolleys and the passengers and the bathrooms and everything else. Pray sitting down so that you can have the proper intent. That's more important than praying standing up without proper intent. But if you're on a bus, let's say you're on a bus and the bus driver, it's a long journey, and the bus driver pulls into the service area and says, we've got 10 minutes to here, and then I'm leaving again. If you're worried that you'll miss the bus, that the driver will drive off without you, stay on the bus and pray sitting down on the bus. Don't get off the bus, because that would defeat the whole purpose of standing up to have intent, because you won't have intent. You'll be worried about missing the bus. Okay, so we find halacha, right? That was a Mishnah and a Gemara. The halacha says the same kind of thing. A sick person may pray even lying on his side, provided he can have intent in his mind to well, I don't want to say what the intent is for. I do. The intent, no, whatever. You have to have the right intent. So again, a sick person, it's going to be hard to stand, impossible to stand. He should pray lying down as long as he's got intent. And if he can't pray, meaning he's not physically able to stay lying on his side for long enough, or he won't have intent, or he can't speak, he should at least think in his heart. He can't. Amida has to be said with your mouth out loud. We begin by saying, Adonai God, open my mouth, so we have to say it. But if you're unable to say it, then at least you should say it in your heart. So again, the main thing is intent. Similarly, if somebody is sitting on a train, I don't know where they're sitting, and there's two idolaters on either side, and the person is afraid that they will interrupt him if he stands up to pray. They'll say, hey, what are you doing? Or they'll walk past, or who knows what. Or, right, so there he's worried about being interrupted. Or, yafsidu mekcho, or he's worried he'll lose business if he stands up to pray. Yeshev b'mkamo v'yitpalel, he should sit in his place and pray there. Lefi she'ein da'ato miyoshevet alav, because if he stands up, he won't be able to have kavanah. He won't have the right intent. He won't be able to have calm thoughts, because he'll be worried about what these people are going to be doing, or about his business. Even though you have to take 3 steps back at the end of prayer, and therefore you have to be standing, no, stay sitting. You should stay sitting, and you should just bow down at the appropriate times in the Amida. Yeah, anyway, yes, exactly. Having the short number takes someone for his time in order to maintain it. Exactly. And there's a whole discussion about whether and when and how to say Havinenu. But fundamentally, if you're in a place where you won't have intent, it's better to say a short prayer and a short prayer sitting down with intent than a long prayer without intent. So again, the question was, why do we stand for the Amida? And I think the answer is we don't stand for the Amida. We stand to have kavanah, which is what you need for the Amida. And therefore, kavanah, standing is secondary to the kavanah. Now, the Shulchan Aruch does finish this siman by saying, if somebody has to pray sitting down, for whatever reason, right? We've just said he's on a donkey, he's on a journey, he's begun to be distracted. Then, when he is able, he's now somewhere quiet, he's sitting back at home or in a shul or something, he has to then repeat the prayer standing up, because really he should be praying standing up, and that's how you have the best kavanah. Normally, if you repeat a prayer service, you're not allowed to pray shacharit twice, unless you can add something new the second time that you didn't say the first time. And the Shulchan Aruch here says that in this case, you don't need to add something, because really your prayer the first time was deficient. The Ramah adds here, and I forgot to include the Ramah, he says nowadays, none of us have the proper intent anyway, and therefore you should not repeat the Amida a second time when you're standing up, because you won't necessarily have better intent when you're standing up than when you're sitting down. But again, and I feel like I'm saying the same thing multiple times, the point of standing is to help you have the correct intent to say the Amida properly, to pray for. So in that sense, we're standing up to have intent that we're standing before God, who is King, and praying. But we're not standing because we're in front of a king. We're standing to be in the right mental space to imagine that we're standing before a king. And in order to get to be in the right mood in terms of standing, depends where we stand. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Bar Yaakov. Al yamod adam b'makom gavah v'yitpel. You should not stand on a high place and pray. Ela b'makom namuch v'yitpel. You should stand in a low place to pray. Shneimar mimamakim karaticha Hashem, because the Tehillim says, from the depths I called out to God. Nowadays, some shuls have a raised bimah in the middle of the shul, or a raised duchen at the front of the shul, and the person who's leading the prayers, the shliach tzibur, stands higher than everybody else to lead the prayers. Back in the time of the Talmud, it sounds as though they had a lower space, a hollow lower space for the person leading the prayers, so you could say mimah makim, and that's why when the Talmud talks about leading prayers, it's yarad lifnei ha-tzibur. He goes down before the community. In other words, the person leading the prayers should be lower than everybody else. Why? Because he needs the greatest intent. He's got to have intent not only for himself, but for the whole community, and therefore he stands in a place that engenders the right intent. Tanya Nami Hachi, there's a similar braita, or a braita that teaches the same thing. Lo yamod adam al gabei kisei, a person should not stand on a chair. V'lo al gabei shafraf, not on a bench. V'lo b'makom kavah, not in a high place. V'yitpalel, and pray. B'makom namuch, but in a low place. Part of standing on a chair is he's scared he's going to fall off. But that's a different discussion that they already had about sitting on a tree or standing on a wall and things like that. Here we're talking about something that's just high, even if you are not worried about falling off. You should stand in a low place to pray. Because there's no place for pride before God. From the depths I called out to you, God. A prayer for the poor person. Ya'atov, they put he's faint, but also Ya'atov is to wrap yourself in a prayer shawl and talit. So again, standing somewhere low is not because you've got to stand somewhere low. It's because you've got to have intent that when you're standing low, you are humble before God, humble before the other people in the community. So all of this theatrics, as it were, of standing to pray is all to get your head, right? You do something with your body that's going to get your head in the right place for prayer. And then obviously we know this, and this would be true whether you're standing or sitting, but obviously we do it when we're standing. Amar Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Chanina Mishum Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, Hamitpalel tzrich shichaven et raglav. Somebody who prays has to align their feet. Shenemar v'ragleihem reglei shar, because it says in Yechezkel, talking about the angels, Ezekiel has got the chariot, the vision of the chariot and the angels and the whole Kabbalistic whatever. So he looks at the angels and they have one foot, one straight foot. So when we're praying, again, when we stand to pray, we are imitating the angels, not because we pretend we're angels, right? We're also humble, but we're getting ourselves in that mindset, and we have to stand with our feet together. We all know, all of us here know, that means put one foot next to the other, your right foot on the right and your left foot on your left. We'll see there's another opinion about what it means to have one straight foot when we get to the Yerushalmi. So the Torah is paraphrasing the Yerushalmi. Yechaven raglav zetzel zeh. What does it mean to line your feet, align your feet, right? Tichtiv ragleim reglei shara. We've got to be like angels. What do angels' feet look like? Metagamina ragleim regel kavanin. Right, their foot is a regel directed or with kavana. Right. Iti b'Yerushalmi. The Yerushalmi says, zeh shomer b'tfilat tzrich lashvot raglav. Right. So somebody standing to pray has to align their feet. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Simon. There's a dispute between these two rabbis, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Simon. Chad Amar, one of them says, Kemalachei Hasharet. Right? We're trying to be like angels. Dichtiv ragleihem regel ishara. The angels have one foot, so we stick out 2 feet, right to left, to be like an angel. I don't know how he knows angels have their feet like that, but okay. The other one says, that when we pray, we're not being like angels, we're being like priests. We're doing the temple service. We're imagining, right, that we're in place of the temple service, so we're like the priests. How do the priests stand? Says in Shemot at the end of Mishpatim, that the Kohanim can't go up steps, can't go to the altar up steps, they have to go on a ramp. What does that mean? They would do granny steps. Is that what you say? Put their heel next to their toe, and then their other heel next to their other toe. They'd walk like that. And therefore, when you stand for the Amidah, that's how you should stand. You should put your right foot in front of your left foot. Like it's a long, not side by side, but one in front of the other, aligned. As if their feet are straight, one in front of the other. Nobody does the second opinion. It would look peculiar if you did, but it's interesting to see that even something like put your feet together for the Amidah and for Kedusha and Devarim Kodesh, there's a dispute whether they should be side by side or front and back. I guess I found that interesting. So why do we stand for the Amidah? We stand for the Amidah so we can have the right intent. What does it mean to have intent? What kind of intent do we need? And for how long do we need intent? So somebody who prays, again, the Amidah, has to have intent for all of the brachot. There's 19 blessings. You have to have intent for 19 different blessings. But if you can't have intent for all 19, that's just too many. Your brain can't, you're going to that tranquil place of, having intent. You can't do all 19. Lefachot yechaven ba'avot. You should at least have intent for the first bracha, which is avot, which was what I was planning on speaking about today, but probably, I may start, but probably I'll speak about it next week. So if you can't have intent for 19, have intent at least for one. And if you did not have intent for avot, for that first bracha, even if you did have intent for all the other blessings, all the other 18, go back to the beginning and start again. I don't know if you ever had that feeling when you're driving and you set off somewhere and then like half an hour later you're, 50 kilometers down the road, 30 miles down the road, you say, how did I get here? I don't remember driving from my house to where I am now. That's a weird effect. Sometimes, unfortunately, I have to admit, when I'm davening, I start davening, I know I started, and all of a sudden I find myself in the middle. I'm 50 miles through the Amida, and I can't remember how I got from there to here because I didn't have intent as I was going. So what the halacha says is you have to at least have intent for all, but if you can't, at least have intent for the first bracha, and if you didn't, go back and do it again. Says the Ramah, that's what I said earlier. Nowadays, nowadays we don't go back and repeat the Amidah if we prayed without intent. Because even if you go back and do it again, there's a very good chance you won't have intent the second time either. So if you won't have intent the second time, what's the point? I was speaking to a friend a couple of weeks ago, just after Pesach, when we switched from saying Mashiach Haruach to Morit Hatal, and when we switched from Ten Talo Matar to saying it says from saying Ten Talo Matar Bracha, we say Ten Bracha, and he was proudly telling me that his record for the number of times he had to repeat it because he forgot was he had to do 4 times one prayer because he kept forgetting to say one of those two things, and maybe he forgot Yalav Yafo as well, maybe it was Chol Hamoed, I don't remember. The point is, if you're going to do it 4 times and still not get it right, then don't even bother. Just do it once without intent. That's the reality, the sad reality in which we live, that most of us don't have time to spend an hour preparing for prayer, and when we do pray, we don't have intent. We're so distracted by so many things and so lacking in focus that we don't have intent. So the Ramah says, in terms of halacha, if you didn't have intent, don't go back and do it again, because all you do is the second time without intent. The halacha is that you do have to repeat the Amidah if you forget certain things. At least do your best to try and have intent the second time, so you don't end up doing it 4 times through. Now, in terms of what is intent, the Mishnah Berurah says, says, you have to have intent for 19 blessings. That's still too much, even one. Have intent at least for the bracha at the end. Baruch Atah Hashem, right? Chonen Hadat, right? Baruch Atah Hashem, Rofei Cholim. Whatever the end of the blessing is that summarizes the blessing. Magen Avraham. The last few words, at least have intent for that, even if you don't have intent for all the rest of it. And what does it mean to have intent? Shichaven, Hainu Pirush Hamilot. We're not talking about Kabbalistic intent and spiritual meaning and great things. Intent of what the words mean. What do you say? Just literally, what are you saying? Which sounds ridiculous. How can you say words and not be paying attention to what you're saying? I remember once I had to speak in the Scottish Parliament. They asked me to give a thought for the day to start off their session in Parliament. I had to write the whole thing out. I had to submit it to them beforehand. They had to check I wasn't going to say anything inappropriate. And then by the time I came to stand in front of the Parliament, and it's only the Scottish Parliament. Anyway, I was so nervous. I read out the words in front of me. I did not know what I was saying. I had no recollection, even while I was saying it, what I was saying. I couldn't concentrate on the words because I was just too nervous about the scenario in which I was in. So as ridiculous as it sounds, sometimes we can even say the words of the Amida and not know what words we're saying, not know what the words mean that we're saying. So, אני פירוש המילים, על כן, מה נכון מאוד להמונים שילמדו פירוש המילot של כל התפילה. So it is important, it is praiseworthy, it is a great thing for people who don't understand the meaning of the prayers, who don't speak Hebrew, or don't understand the English they're reading, or whatever other language. They should learn what the words mean, right? And that's not what this class is about. Go and find another class on WebYeshiva to learn what the words mean, or sit at home with the Siddur, learn what the words mean. You should understand what you're saying. Al kol panim shel birchat avot umodim b'vadai yesh chiyuv alav leida bi'uro. The very least, the first blessing of avot and the first of the last three blessings, modim, you definitely have to, as an obligation, to know what words you're saying. Now, I'm not getting into what language you should pray and all those other kinds of things, but nor am I necessarily recommending. I know ArtScroll prints a Siddur which has every word in Hebrew and next to it the word in English. Now, I find that far more distracting than just having it all in Hebrew or in English. But if that helps you have intent on the word, so that's good for you, then do that. Use that. If not, pray in English. If not, learn the words in Hebrew. But when we talk about kavanah, the basic kavanah, the basic intent you need for prayer, and the reason that we're standing to pray is to understand what you're saying, which is really a very low bar indeed, because, well, my experience with the Scottish Parliament would say the opposite. But I imagine if you're standing in front of a king, you would understand the words that are coming out of your mouth, I hope. Yeah, if you've had to stand up and give a speech in a situation, sometimes you're so nervous you don't know what you're saying, but ideally you should. Now, why do we have to have intent in Avot? Because this shir was supposed to be about Avot. Avot ki hu siddur shivcho shel makom. This is arranging, organizing the prayers of the Omnipresent. Alken eno bedin she'az poneh levo v'dvarei acherim. Therefore, you shouldn't be thinking about other things. V'yesh poskim degam modim chashuv ka'avot lechatchila. Some of the poskim say that modim anachnu lach, that prayer is as important as Avot. If you think you won't even be able to have intent on the Avot prayer, then don't pray. Until your mind is calm, so you can at least trust yourself to have the right intent when you're saying the first blessing of Avot. You're stressed about something at work, in your family, I don't know what, and you can't think of anything else, don't pray. Take a break, find a time when you can set aside all those worries, and then pray. You are in a situation where there's too much happening around you, and you're going to miss, don't pray then, pray another time. By and large, we tend to try and pray at the set, try to pray at the set times when we're supposed to pray, even if we don't think we'll have the right intent. One person who really believes in having the right intent, and there's only one, and therefore I don't think you should emulate him, but the Amshanov Rebbe waits until he has the right intent before he prays. So if he wakes up in the morning and can't have the right intent for Shacharit, he waits until he's got intent, and then he'll pray. I've only been to see him once. I went once to with a friend who wanted to ask him some advice on something, and my friend spoke to the Amshanov Rebbe's Gabbai, and he said, come by at 2 in the morning. That's the best time to to catch him if you have a question. So we went there at 2 in the morning. We weren't sure if we were going to his house or not his house. As we approached his house, he came out with 10 of his Hasidim around him, walked off to the shul, which was around the corner, and got to shul and sat for 10, 15, 20 minutes to compose his thoughts. And then he stood up and he davened Shacharit. Shacharit from the morning before at 2:15 a.m. He was davening Shacharit. He was davening Shacharit for that morning. Now that day happened to have been Rosh Chodesh. It was no longer Rosh Chodesh that night. It had been Rosh Chodesh that morning. So after he davened the Amida, he stopped. He spoke to a few people who came to ask some questions, and then he davened Musaf for that morning. The Amshanova felt that his intent was more important than the times for davening. So if you are the Amshanova, right, this is the question that Yitzchak is asking. If the time for tefillah will pass and you haven't got the right intent, is it better to pray at the right time or to wait and pray with the right intent? I think my answer would be, if you are able to pray with the kavanah of the Amshanova Rebbe, and you're certain that if you wait another 12 hours you'll have the right intent, then maybe you should do that. But if you're not the Amshanova Rebbe, but a regular human being, then I think it's unlikely that you could guarantee your kavanah will be better if you wait 6 hours. So it's better to pray at the right time. At least you'll have the mitzvah of praying at the right time, even if your prayer was not with intent. If I don't know, if you need to go to the bathroom, right, and if you go to the bathroom first, you will miss the time for prayer. You should go to the bathroom and daven 10 minutes, 20 minutes late, with proper intent. But if you're waiting until you get that spark of inspiration to pray with the right kavanah, and you'll wait hours and hours, don't do that. So, yeah, it's important to pray at the right time. Some Hasidim are more flexible with the times, but fundamentally you should try and pray at the right time. And it's not that you don't pray it, but you'll have to pray it at a different time. So I think in the real world, for real people who probably, unfortunately, don't have kavanah at the best of times, at least pray at the right time. At least you can check something off on the list. Is it print to skip davening after a journey if intent is compromised? And same answer. If you think that having a nap first, or shower, whatever it is that you need, will help you daven with proper intent later, then sure. But I think most people nowadays would not be able to guarantee that they'll have kavanah later. So it's better to daven without kavanah than better to daven without kavanah at the right time than without kavanah at the wrong time. That's what I'm trying to say. But if you're in a place where you can't pray and you can't say Havinenu because it's winter or because you don't remember the words or whatever it is, then sure, then you don't pray until you get to a place where you can pray, and the Gemara has several examples in cases like that. Okay. So the halacha, as we said, is you should put your feet side by side. So Yehaven Raglov, you should put your feet together as if they're only 1 foot. So that you can. Oh yes, sorry. Okay, then yes, I agree with your statement. Correct. Right, that, as we said, we saw in the Torah, angels have 1 foot. Looks like they've got 1 foot. Some people say, and I think everyone does this, but some people say you should take 3 steps forward at the beginning of your Amida, as if you are approaching to do something that needs to be done. Some people get confused and think they have to take 3 steps back and then 3 steps forward. What you're supposed to do is take 3 steps forward at the beginning of your prayer to put yourself in the right physical place and mental space, and at the end take 3 steps back. The backwards and forwards before and after that is not really part of what we're supposed to do. And now, again, in terms of standing, you're not supposed to stand ramrod straight like a soldier, like a guard at Buckingham Palace. Your standing is really a very, not the way you would stand if you were standing in front of King Charles III or any other king. Who was saying Kofet Rosh? You have to put your head down ma'at, Shiyu einav lamata la'aretz, that your eyes should be facing downwards at the ground. V'yachshov ki'ilu omed beit hamikdash, you should think, imagine you're standing in the temple. Or b'libo yikaven lemala l'shamayim, and your heart should be facing upwards, directed upwards to heaven. Some people like davening in a big open space where they can feel much more spiritual and they feel nature and all those kinds of things. And by looking out at the expansive vistas or at the sea or whatever, they feel they have more intent. Okay, I'm not here to talk about that, but the Shulchan Aruch says you should face looking down, meaning with humility and with your heart facing up. You should fold your arms over your heart. Fold your arms. I don't know exactly what that means. Put your right hand over your left hand. This is always chesed over din. You're standing now like a slave before his master, servant before his master, not like a petitioner before the king, but a servant from his master. Pachad, with fear, trepidation, and awe. Don't put your hands on your hips. That's a way of like showing off. Look at me, posing for a photo. We're not standing haughtiness, as they say. So head standing up, feet together, head down, arms folded, and heart directed to God. Okay, so that's the standing, but of course an important part of praying is the bowing. So, which also is not something we really do in any context I can think of when you go to meet an important person. I guess you at the beginning, maybe. Anyway, Tana Rabbanan, Elu brachot shtam shocher bahen. These are the prayers where you should bow. Ba'avot tchila v'sof, in avot at the beginning and at the end. When you say Baruch Atah Hashem to begin the Amida, and Baruch Atah Hashem Magen Avraham at the end of that bracha, you bow down. That's twice. B'hoda'ah tchila v'sof, and at Modim Anachnu Lach, and Ve'al Kulam. Right, the blessing there, you bow beginning and end. And that's the halacha, minhag, that's what we do. V'im ba lashuach besof kol bracha u'bracha, if you want to bow at the end of every bracha, or b'tchilat kol bracha u'bracha, and at the beginning of every bracha, melamdino toshlo, you should not do that. You see someone doing that, if you can, you should say to them, maybe that's not what you do. Just parenthetically, the extreme opinion here is that those 4 times, the only times you pray, you bow throughout all of davening, and the Vilna Gaon says you do not bow during Aleinu Shabbat, you do not bow during Baruch Hu, and you do not bow during Kaddish, because the Gemara says you only bow those 4 times and nothing else. Most people do bow many other times, but in the Amidah, they only bow those 4 times. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, Mishum bar Kapar, Hediot k'mo shemanu. Okay, so Rabbi Shimon ben Pazi says, we're talking here about a regular person, a normal guy. He or she only bows 4 times in the Amidah. However, Kohen Gadol, right, a Kohen Gadol who has a higher position in society, is a more important person, needs greater humility. Therefore, he bows b'sof kol bracha u'bracha. He bows at the end of every bracha. Again, the standing and the bowing is to get the right intent, and he needs great humility. HaMelech, the king, is even more important, more haughty, more greater than the Kohen Gadol. So he bows at tchila, kol bracha u'bracha, v'sof kol bracha u'bracha. He bows at the beginning and end of every bracha. Which means the reason we tell normal people not to do that is that they're showing off a bit by, look how humble I am. I'm bowing as much as the king. Okay. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Nachmeni, ledidi mefarshali minei Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. So he's got a slightly different, or rather a clarification. Hediot k'mo shamanu, a regular person bows, like we said, 4 times in the Amidah, 2 in Avot, 2 in Modim. Kohen Gadol tchila kol bracha u'bracha. Kohen Gadol, beginning of every blessing. HaMelech kevin shekara shoven elokef. But a king bows at the beginning of Shemoneh Esrei and doesn't stand up at all until the end. Shneimar, it says, Vayikechol Shlomo yipalel v'gomer. When Shlomo dedicates the temple, says when he finished praying for the temple and for Am Yisrael and for the whole future Jewish history, then he stood up from kneeling on his or bowing on his knees. Kra is the same word we're talking about, bowing, even though he was kneeling. So king bows the entire time. How do you bow? Amar Bachanina Saba Mishmei Derav Hamid Palel Kshu Korea Baruch. You bow, bend when you say the word Baruch. Ukshu Zokef B'Shem. When you stand up straight, you should stand up when before you're saying God's name. Amar Shmuel, my time. What's the reason? Derav Tichtiv Hashem Zokef Gufim, because it says God straightens the bend. So when you say Hashem, you should be standing up straight. So what we do is we bend our knees on Baruch, we bow forward on Atah, and stand up straight for Hashem. Amar Tanchum, Amar Rishon ben Levi, mitpalat tzrich jichra ad shitpakaku kol choliot shebeshidra. When you bow, you have to bow so much that all the vertebrae in your spine stick out a bit. That's the level, the amount of bowing. And Ula Amar ad k'nei shir'eh isa keneked libo. I don't exactly know how to understand this. What they've translated, isa is a coin. So that you can see a coin in front of your heart, they've translated it as if there's a coin on the ground, you're bending over so you can see the money on the floor. I always understood that it was so you'd be able to hold a coin in your belly as you're bowing over. In other words, the first opinion is your back sticks out. The other opinion is that your front caves in, but I'm not sure if I'm right. Rabbi Chanina Amar Kevan She'ena Rosho Shoven Tzorech. Rabbi Chanina says, no, just bow your head a little bit. That's enough. You don't have to go full bowing. Amrava Hud Mitzah Nafshe. Rava says, if it's hard for you to bow, if you can't bend your whole body because of illness or age or whatever, then just do your best and bow your head. Or Mechsi Kamandakara, it looks as if you're bowing, but if you can bow, you should bow. And now, okay, we have 10 minutes, and that's how long it will take. And you may know this Gemara, in which case I apologize. But we talk about 18 brachot, which are really 19. And I want to go through this in more detail as we go through each. This was originally supposed to be a 19-part series, one bracha each week, and it's now cut back to, I think, a 12-part series, maybe even less. And rather than do one bracha each week, we spent 2 weeks and not got to any brachot. Bli neder, next week, we'll start on Avot. But before that, I want to point out that last week I said the first three and the last three seem to be kind of the original, in a sense, and the middle ones had more fluctuation and variation and changed and evolved through the ages. By the time we get to the Gemara, the middle blessings also are in a set order. It's not that we have to say all these things. We have to say them in a specific order, and the Gemara finds reasons for the order that we say them. So the Gemara says, Hani Shemoneh Esrei keneged mi. Sorry, before we say the order, why do we have 18? What's the number 18 represent? Am Rabbi Hillel Bar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani keneged Shemoneh Esrei Azkarot Shema Amar David Ba'avul Hashem B'nei Elim. Corresponding to the 18 times God's name is mentioned in Tehillim, Havul Hashem B'nei Elim. It's clear, I think, from here that when they asked the question, there were 18 brachot in Shemoneh Esrei. Last week we talked about how they got to 18. Did they start with 17 and then add one? Did they start with 18 and then lose one and add one? Did they? Anyway, at some point they had 18 and they counted and they said this God's name appears 18 times in Havul Hashem. Rav Yosef Amar keneged Shemoneh Esrei Azkarot shebekriyat Shema. In the Shema says God's name 18 times. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi keneged Shemoneh Esrei chuliosh b'shidra. Rabbi Tanchum says in Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi there's 18 vertebrae in the spine. Don't go and look in a medical dictionary. There's not 18 vertebrae in the spine, but anyway. Hani Timnisari Tishsari Havu. So then the Gemara says, what are you talking about? There's not 18, there's 19 blessings. So again, I think this is another layer added on later in the Gemara after they added, and especially in Bava, I think we said last week that in Israel, in Eretz Israel, there were 18 blessings for a lot longer. In Bava, they ended up with a 19th quite early. So they're adding on this layer. There's 19 brachot, not 18. So why are you telling me the reason for 18? And now we have to go back to all the previous and add one in. Am Rabbi Levi brakat haminim b'yavne tiknuha. So Rabbi Levi explains that the 19th blessing of the heretics was added later. So keneged mi tiknuha. So if we've just explained why 18, what is the 19th one for? Amar Rabbi Levi Rabbi Hillel Bar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani keneged el kavod hirim in Havul Hashem B'nei Elim. it says the word El, Kel, and that's another mention of God's name. It's a 19th, like an 18th and a half. L'Rav Yosef Keneged Echad Sheb'Kriyas Shema, even though it says God's name 18 times, but the word Echad is also like God's name, so that's a 19th. Rabbi Tanchum Rishur Ben Levi Keneged Chulya Ketana Sheb'Shitra. According to Rabbi Tanchum, who says correspond to the vertebrae, there's a 19th vertebrae, which is very small, which you can't see. Again, don't look in a medical dictionary. So now we're going to go through the 19 blessings and find mostly reasons from the verses and some from logic to stress. All of the blessings were written either by Anshe Knesset Gedolah or by rabbis who came after that. Right? These are not, nobody is saying that the Shemoneh Esrei brachot was written in the Torah or was given to Moshe at Sinai, but the rabbis who wrote the brachot looked for sources or reasoning in the Torah and Tanakh as to why they put them where they are, and having done that, they now become fixed in that number. Some commentary, I was looking at one commentary in Osir Tefillah earlier today, Osir Tefillot, who started counting the number of letters and words in each bracha and saying this number of letters corresponds to that number of things, and this number of words corresponds to that number of things, and this is the deep secret. The idea of these brachot being purposeful and meaningful in their order and in the wording is one that has a lot of clout. So we're not saying, when we're connecting it to Tanakh, we're not saying it comes from Tanakh, but the rabbis who established it looked to Tanakh for guidance. And I think hopefully a theme we'll see through the next few weeks is that the wording that they used for their prayers is heavily based on Tanakh. It's like a pre-Mishnaic version of Tanakh is how they wrote the Siddur. Tana Rabbanan Menayin Shomrim Avot. How do we know that we start by saying Avot? Shneimar Havu L'Shem B'nei Elim. God, give mighty ones give greatness to God, right? And the mighty ones, the B'nei Elim, are the Avot. Menayin Shomrim Gevorot. How do we know that we should say Gevorot? Shneimar Havu L'Shem Kavod Va'oz. Give God strength and honor and strength. Menayin Shomrim Kedushot. Shneimar Havu L'Shem Kavod Shemoshtach V'L'Shem Badrut Kodesh. Holiness. So, if we're looking to Havu, that prayer as the 18, the source for the 18 and the 19, it makes sense that we look to that, to David HaMelech, to his Tehillim, for the structure of the beginning of the Amida. That's great, but then it kind of runs out a little bit after the first three, and we get into a bit more shaky territory. And the wording changes as well in the Quran. Mara ulama bina chakrusha. So the first three is, why do we say it? Here it's, what did they see that made them put the blessing of understanding after the blessing of Kedusha? They found a verse, Shenemar hikdishu et kadosh Yaakov et Elokei Yisrael yaritzu. V'samechle, so there's a verse about Kedusha in Yeshaya, and then immediately afterwards, the next verse, V'yadu ta'ei ruach bina, it says the word bina immediately afterwards. Okay, I mean, yeah. Mara ulamad shuvacha bina, what verse, what do they look to see, to place repentance after understanding? It says in this one verse in Yeshaya that first you need understanding, and then rafalo, which sounds like healing, and the Gemara says maybe it means healing. No, it doesn't. It means spiritual healing, i.e. teshuvah. Right? So if we're talking about refuah, so let's put the blessing of refuah after the blessing of teshuvah. You shouldn't think that. And so we see that first you do teshuvah, and then you ask for slicha, so that takes priority over refuah. And then mara ulama giula b'shavi'ich. Now we're not saying juxtaposition, but we're saying objectively number 7 should be the blessing of redemption. Why? Right? In other words, it's not 7's not connected to 6, but 7 needs to be 7. Because in the future we will be redeemed in the 7th year. Therefore, they said it should be the 7th blessing. Somehow saying the blessing of Geulah in the 7th reminds God, encourages God, brings God to bring about the redemption. So we get into this discussion right, in Sanhedrin per Chelek. There's different opinions about what the Messianic era will look like. So the 6th year of the 7-year cycle, there'll be kind of thunder and lightning voices. 7th year is going to be war. Motzei Shvit ben Tabibah, and David's going to come in the 8th year, right? So we should say Geula is the 8th bracha. No, Milchama Nami Itchal to Geula He Halavai. That war is also the beginning of the redemption, and therefore the 7th year with the wars, we say the bracha of Geula in the 7th year. Halavai, the current wars should be the beginning of the redemption. Maru Lamarfo Bishminit. Why did they make refuah the 8th blessing? Amarav Acham Mitoch Shinit Na Milah Bishminit. Because Brit Milah is on the 8th day, Shetzricha refuah, and you need to be healed from that. Lefigach Gavor Bishminit. Therefore, it's like keyword stuffing. 3 times says the Bishminit. So they said the 8th blessing is about healing. Maru Olam Aberkat Hashnim B'Tshit. Why is the blessing of prosperity about rain the 9th blessing? Amar Alexandri Kenegen Mafki Sharim. Because of the people who control the prices of the markets, the market makers. We pray, we say in Tehillim, God should break the strength of the wicked. David Kamra B'Shit Amra David Melech said it as the 9th psalm, even though we call it number 10 nowadays, but the first 2 were really stuck to what we call 1 and 2 were really 1, so number 10 is really number 9. And since David said, deal with these price fixers, these market manipulators, in his 9th psalm, we should say it in our 9th bracha. Maru Lamar Kibbutz. I know I'm doing this quickly because I'm going to talk about each one in its turn when we get there. Anyway, Maru Lamar Kibbutz Galeot Lacha Birkat Hashem. Why does ingathering of the exiles come after prayer for prosperity? Dichtiv Atem Hari Yisrael an Napchem Titeno Upirichem Tisula Ame Yisrael Ki Karvu Lavo. So we have a verse in Cheskel which talks about prosperity and then talks about making coming in gathering of the exiles. Once the exiles have been brought to Israel, then it's time to judge the wicked. I will place my hand on you and wash you like with lye. I will restore your judges as at first. Once the wicked have been judged, that's I've lost 10th, 11th bracha. Then there's no more wicked. So we can say, right, so the willful sinners are gone because they've been judged. Once there's no more wicked, then the righteous rise up, their horn, trumpet, chitrim, along with the righteous, we include the righteous converts. We talk about honoring the elderly and the wise, and then immediately after it says when there are foreigners living with you, so we understand that as righteous converts. Where are the righteous elevated? In Jerusalem. So that's the next bracha. Once Jerusalem is rebuilt, David HaMelech comes. So that is now, I've lost track, the 15th, 14th bracha. Once David has come, then we can get to actually the prayer. Shemei Tefillah, Shneimar, V'aviotim el hakochi v'simachtim b'veit tefilati. And then we've prayed Maru Lama Birkat Kohanim Achar Hoda'ah. Why did I skip one? With Modim. Okay. Zavech Todayich. Yeah. Kevin Shabbat Tefillah Ba'avodah. So after prayer we have temple service. Shneimar Eloteim Zirchen Rotzon Mizbechi. Kevin Shabbat Avodah Ba'atodah. Once you've got temple service, you can give thanks. Shneimar Zavech Todayich Chabdenu. Maru Lama Birkat Kohanim Achar Hoda'ah. Why is the Birkat Kohanim after Modim Anachnu Lach? Tichtiv V'Yisa Aaron Et Yadav El Ha'am V'Yivarchem V'Yered Ma'asot HaChatat V'Olav HaShlamim. He finished the sacrifices, then he did Birkat Kohanim. Maru Lama Sim Shalom. Why do we finish with Sim Shalom? Achar Birkat Kohanim Tichtiv Samwit Shemi Al Bnei Yisrael Fani Yavarchem. Kohanim should say their blessing to Bnei Israel, and then God will bless them. Birchad HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shalom. The blessing of God is peace. Shneimar Hashem Yivrechet Amo V'Shalom. God will bless his people with peace, and that's a great place to end this. Thank you very much. Bli nera. Next week I'll get to Avot. And that's it. Thank you very
Thank
much
you.
for joining, everybody. Thank you all.
Thank you. Really well done. Love all your references.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. See you next week.
Thank you.